First off, thank you everyone else who's here, and Grace, of course, for coming this evening. This is part of our Native History Education Initiative project that we're working on. The Historical Society is. So we're bringing in experts from all across the Twin Cities to share some of their expertise on a number of different topics. So we're really pleased to have Grace here with us today. She works to advance the well-being of the community through her expertise in Dakota language, education, art, culture preservation, and wellness. And she's served on a number of different boards throughout her career. So she's got more than enough experience to give us a wonderful presentation on how we get some of these place names in Minnesota in general. So Grace, it's all yours. Take it away.
Pidamaya Elsa. So I'm going to just introduce myself to y'all today. Hamadakiapi, Piushkia Wachiakapi, Dakota Tiyospe Ota Yuha Win Demie, Washichuya Grace Goldtooth and Makiapie. Ocheti Shakoi Edaha, Badewa Kantoa, Demataha. Chashayapi, Dechia Tahawahi, Chashayapi Edwati. Wana Executive Director Himacha Dakota Wichocha Ed Dawani. Shichecha Pi Nuba Wichabadu He Naku Ampetukde Chante Mawashte. So I greet you all with a good heart and handshake. I appreciate everybody's time and efforts today to be here and to listen in. I realize that, there's a lot of other things going on, a lot of other places that you can be, and I appreciate you taking the time out to come in to listen to my presentation today. When I introduced myself in my language, I introduced it in Dakota language, and Dakota is the first language spoken here in Minnesota. In fact, Minnesota itself is a Dakota word. It translates, and it's actually pronounced a little bit different. It's Mnisota Makoce. It's where the waters, the clear waters reflect the sky, or sky tinted water, or cloud tinted waters. There's just different ways to translate that. But along with my introduction, I have 2 children. I live in Cansayapi, which is also the Lower Sioux Indian Community. We're located in Southwest Minnesota. We're one of the 4 Dakota communities here in Minnesota. And so I'm going to do something with y'all today, and but as I was saying in my introduction, I really try my best to teach Dakota. I work at an organization that's all about revitalizing our Dakota language, our lifeways, our teachings. I really do my best to do what I can to educate our relatives. And so today is another chance and opportunity to do that. Like I take any chance that I can to share about our history, our culture, anything like that. I really focus a lot of my time on that. So not presenting to you guys, but you might have to just go like this. So Dakota homelands, like I said, is Mnisota Makoce is the ancestral homelands of the Dakota people. Like I said, even Minnesota itself is a Dakota word. Within Minnesota, there is 4 Dakota communities. There is my community, Cansayapi, the Lower Sioux Dakota community. There's Tintawinta, the Prairie Island Dakota community, Bede Mayato in Shakopee, Pejutizizikapi is the Upper Sioux Dakota community. And each one of these communities speaks a similar dialect that I do, is Dakota. In my introduction, I also said that I'm part of the Ocheti Shakoi of the 7 Council Fires. And so of the 7 Council Fires, my band of Dakota is the Badewa Kantua, the Spirit Lake Dwellers. And so a lot of our people in our band were located near what currently is called Mille Lacs area and region. But definitely we had a lot of campsites all through different areas of Minnesota. I know that today we are talking about, a lot of the presentation is about the reflection in our names, is the different names that we have here in present day. And it just demonstrates how rich the culture is for Minnesota, but also most importantly, the First Nations people that resided here long before Minnesota was a state. The names are also all over the state. You'll see townships, cities, counties, even landmarks of different areas that were originally Dakota words, and we still have those sites. So long over through time, we still use some of those names, but now currently more and more that you hear going on today is bringing back those traditional place names for different sites, and especially in areas where the current names of some places are a little offensive to our history and to different people within the state. And one of those in particular that I think of that had longstanding, a lot of things emerged about the name change was a particular lake, and that was Lake Calhoun, and being changed into Tiyospe Makoce, into White Earth Lake. And I think that when I talk about the stories, I want to share a little bit that with you guys, is that a lot of these places had stories and had history behind why they were named that. And so for Bade Makaska, a very unique story about that area in particular is the land there was very fertile, very much, you could grow a lot within the soil and the land there. And there was a Dakota camp that camped there, and it was recorded by some missionaries that came through. They were recording, and when they came across this Dakota camp, something really stuck out to them, very, very much so. And what it was is they were growing and farming a lot of food, and way more food than what they needed for their camp. And so these folks that came from the missionaries, they asked the camp, they said, why do you grow so much? You don't need this much. And they said it was because they knew that that land was very fertile, and that they knew that the other Dakota camps could benefit from that. And so they grew enough for other Dakota campsites around the area and did trade, which just demonstrated the philosophy and the grounding of Dakota people of being stewards of the land, and just carrying that through as far as how we are as relatives to one another, and those reflections in the way that we make those connections to each other. But we know that in our history, we have a tremendous amount of impacts that changed a lot of these traditional place sites, the connections to the land, all these different things that occurred were actual federal acts and assimilation policies that were put in place to basically assimilate all of the Indian people into a Euro-American society. And through that became a lot of disconnection to the land, a lot of disconnection to language, just a tremendous amount of change within a short time happened within our area. And today, our tribes possess sovereignty, even though it's limited by federal, state, and local laws. But the laws on tribal lands vary depending on each tribe. So just knowing that there was a system put in place, there was policy put in place to disrupt what was here, what was the First Nation people doing, and how they were with the land. And so one of the areas that in particular that we hear more and more about most recently in media is about boarding schools. And so I did want to share a little bit about that in my presentation. I'm sure that a lot of folks have been seeing some information come out about these residency schools and finding these mass graves or finding these children's graves, and bringing our children home. So in the late 18th century, the US government wanted to, like I said, really assimilate all of our Native American relatives into a Euro-American society. And so promoting this practice of educating our Indian children in ways of the white people, making them into more of these industries, and to help that, they used funding from a Civilization Fund Act of 1819, which provided funding to these different societies, and most of them were religious groups that worked on educating Indians. Schools were founded by missionaries next to Indian settlements, so right next to reservations, and then eventually building those facilities into a boarding facility. One of these photographs that I have here is actually right here in my own community. This is the Indian school that was put up here in Lower Sioux community in Morton, Minnesota. And the interesting part that I always see about this particular picture is the photographs and images on the walls, and nothing culturally relevant to our people, nothing showing or demonstrating that they were near a reservation or a community of some sort of ethnic background or cultural background. Nothing in this image shows or demonstrates that. So very much grounded in more of this, like I said, Euro-American society. And so I always want to come back to these things because these demonstrate the impacts that they had on where things are currently within the state. I also oh, I'll go to a question. So we have a question here. Are any of these schools still standing in Minnesota? That's a great question. Thank you for your question, Andy. Yes, there is actually one of the schools is still standing here in Minnesota. It's over near Morris. Morris, Minnesota was actually one of the schools here within the state. And so now at the school there in Morris, they do offer free tuition for Native American students that go to school there. Within the state, though, there wasn't federal, if that makes sense, federal boarding schools. Carlisle is a big one that you'll hear a lot about, and that was out in Pennsylvania. Quite a few of my relatives were shipped out there to Pennsylvania to that school. But so in efforts, as I'm thinking now, we know this process in our history, these federal acts and assimilation policies that took place. Now we're in this space and time of how do we help mitigate these, and making sure that those effects that happen to our culture, our way of life, are really helping to find different ways of preserving our heritage and identity. And this particular one, I took a picture. It was an infograph, but it showed, like when I was talking about the Ocheti Shakoi, the 7 council fires, it's mainly the great Sioux Nation. It's made up of Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, but each one of these different bands comprise of this whole entire nation of people. And so I wanted to give you guys a visualization of currently today where a lot of those reservations and reserves are located within the United States, all the way up into Canada. So each one of those dots and tribal seals that you see in this image, each one of those represents different communities within our area that have similar language dialect as mine. And there's over 114, I believe. So sometimes when you guys hear about Dakota history or Sioux people or all these different things, we really get into like this very narrow-minded way of looking at it rather than a broader of looking at us as a whole nation of people. And so I always want to make sure that I point that out, is even though I'm enrolled in the federally recognized tribe of Lower Sioux, I've also have relatives that go all into Canada, and the idea of setting up individual allotment policy came into effect in 1934. So in 1934 is the Indian Reorganization Act. It laid out new not only rights for Native Americans, but it also encouraged tribal sovereignty and land management by tribes. So this is where the tribes came in. They basically had a constitution. A lot of the tribes' constitutions that were presented to them in 1934 were just basically like a template that was used for each different tribes, regardless of their own traditional way of self-governance. It still was something that was pushed upon them as how to govern themselves. And so I know that my tribe in particular, we are one of those tribes. We established in 1934 on the Lower Sioux community. And so that relationship between these tribal governments and the federal government, there's still a lot of resistance. There's still a lot of problems and issues with how they can support tribes and being more with self-determination, like making sure that they know how to govern themselves, get the services they need to their communities and things like that. So big part about it is reconnecting like reconnecting our people and reconnecting to the land. That was one of the things that I had an elder quite a few years ago used to share this teaching with me, and they would say that the land carries a memory and the land will never forget what happened here. And I always remember that's sharing that with me, because we know here in our Minnesota history, we're taught that, especially in 6th grade social studies, our youth are really taught and encouraged about Minnesota history. But in our history, there's a lot of gaps. We know that there's things that were shared. We know that things that weren't shared. And one of those things is how do we know this history and we know what happened here, but how do we help heal? How do we help reconnect? Because that, to me, is the missing piece. Like I say, if there's the land carries the history, and our people carry some of that history, how do we bridge that and reconnect? And I truly think that a lot of it is reconnecting with the language, and that reconnecting with the language helps support a lot of that healing process. It helps to foster this understanding and also honoring of the First Nation people. So as you see more and more in our Minnesota history, I'm very proud that there has been a lot of work done on trying to find ways to reconcile, trying to find ways to heal, but also trying to find justice for the people that's still here, still fighting for their own rights. And that's one of the areas too I'll get into a little bit later, is just currently what's going on. But making sure that we know and understand that there's an importance, there's a value to bringing about that reconnecting. And how do we do that? One of them, of course, is preserving our own identity, preserving the identity in the original Dakota place names. There's so much importance to that. It brings visibility. It reminds us not only as Dakota people, but all of us as Minnesota residents, of being residents of the state and understanding, like, there was a First Nations people. There was place names for all these places we love to visit. Like, for example, like by Fort Snelling, where the Minnesota River and the Mississippi River meet. We all know that location down below. It's below Fort Snelling. It's Coldwater Springs. We know all these different areas along there that are taught to us, but we don't know the Dakota name. And the Dakota name is Bdote. It's where two rivers meet. It's the confluence of two rivers. And not only Bdote is where the Minnesota River and the Mississippi River meet, but Bdote was one of our birthing sites. It was one of the sites where our women would go and give birth, because we knew the significance and the power in not only the water, but just that location itself. And so that location is a very significant site to us. And I know that there's been work done time and time again to bring that up, to bring it forward. In one of my prior roles in preservation was as I was the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for Lower Sioux Indian Community. And part of that role and responsibility was making sure that I'm preserving, but also most importantly, protecting. I became a protector of our land and our water, because a lot of times federal agencies like roads, highways, bridges, even dams, anything that has any ground disturbance at all has to go through a process where they have to make sure that there's no cultural sites that are going to be affected by that project. So everything would come through my office. And one time when I was working in that position, one of the federal agencies that I met with was for federal highways, and they flew right here to my community, Lower Sioux, had a private jet. They flew in from DC. And these federal agents that came, you could tell right away that there was a tremendous amount of lack of just respect and understanding. Their project that they were pushing to go through, this road project, was going to affect a bunch of cultural sites, significant sites, not only to me, but even just Minnesota constituents, just anybody of the Minnesota state, because one of those sites was an actual battlefield site. It was where the U.S. Dakota battle, one of the battle sites, took place. So we knew there was a lot of cultural artifacts, a lot of things there. And during that conversation and during that discussion with them, I had to explain to them. I had to find the words to put together to explain how important that is, the connection, the story, the land carries the memory, the land, all these different things. It's very challenging when you think of things and you speak of things in this very philosophical kind of just, you know, this way, but more importantly is trying to get somebody to really truly hear you, because I'm invisible. I'm to them, I'm just a check mark off their list. They, a lot of times it's my points and viewpoints when those meetings that I would have, those government to government consultations, a lot of the times it was like I was just talking to a wall. It was like nobody was really truly trying to hear. It was like I was just getting in the way of a project, and you know, oh, you know, you people make a big fuss about any of that history. It's in the past. And I even had one individual say, you know, that's in the past now. You guys got to move forward. You got to start moving forward. Just very offensive, very ignorant things would be shared. And what I found myself doing is digging deep and finding other ways to educate, finding other ways to shift that mindset, to bring about the visibility to what this really is. It's preservation. There's no other way I can say it other than that. It's preserving what is left. And you know, and I think about it right here in my own community. In 1862, there was a battle, there was a war that took place, and it lasted for 6 weeks. 6 weeks, and it took the lives of nearly 500 people. 500. Most of them were civilians or white settlers. They were told that there was open land here to be taken advantage of, to be used. No one told them that there was these Dakota people here residing here. And while this was going on, and the onset of this fighting was also this other war, the Civil War was going on at the exact same time. And in fact, we had Dakota people from our own community that were headed out for the war. We're going to the Civil War to go fight, enlisted. And so after that war ended with the US government and my relatives, the Dakota people, the United States punished them. They punished the Dakota. And so they abolished all their treaties. The Congress abolished all of our treaties with the United States government, and they forcibly removed us from our homelands. So there's only a few mixed bloods, some other relatives that stayed, but a lot of them left the area. And one of the name of my community, Cansayapi, is where they paint the trees red. And the story with that is they painted the trees red so that they could mark where it was safe for our relatives to come home. Because in 1863, they didn't stop there. They decided that in 1863, they were like, you know, if any of these Dakota people are found here in Minnesota, we give all residents of this state, there was a bounty. There was a bounty on each head for $500 of a Dakota scalp. So they gave rights to everybody to just take us out. If they see us around, they can do that. And so that I say that relatives as more of like, you probably heard some of this history somewhere, and you maybe you haven't heard about the US Dakota War. But that's one of the things is preservation, preserving what we have, telling these stories, sharing these messages. But also the next part about that is, how do we advocate? How do we help our Dakota and be an ally to the Dakota people? How do we help acknowledge this history? How do we become truly like a good ally and relative? Because in our language, Dakota, it translates to friend or ally. That's what Dakota translates to. And I say this in the utmost respectful way is how to putting that accountability on our relatives that live here in the state. You know, there's a lot to be learned. There's a lot that we can learn from in our history that can be applied to today and what's going on in our state. And I think that looking back and learning a little bit about that and learning a little bit about these place names, why do we have these place names? Why do we have all these Dakota place names all around our state? And what do they mean? I see this lake and it's called something. I see this town and it's called something. They're all around us, all these different places. And so I encourage you, start advocating, start saying, hey, like I just heard this presentation, you know, about Mnisota Makoce, you know, about the Minnesota land and a little bit of the history here on the land. And taking that little bit of information, just even just subtle information, I could go really broad and I could go very much in depth. And that's the challenge that sometimes we have is how can we take all of that information and help ourselves and apply it to us as human, as just being human and just acknowledging it. And so I know today, in today's time and what currently status of my community in particular is we don't have any more first language speakers left in our community. We do, however, have Dakota language teachers. We have 5 Dakota language teachers within our community. We have a lot of language learners within our community. We have a lot of language speakers, people that are using the language. I will say that since we've gotten our early Head Start preschool immersion program here, it's been in our community now since 2018, and our babies are speaking, sharing the language, sharing the culture. You can see and hear it, and you know that we're all working together to make this happen. Like we're all as a whole collective making that movement, and we need support. We need our outside supporters. We need y'all to also learn with us, to engage with us. And so I very much so I was like, you know, I was thinking about today and I wanted to just share story. I'm really more into storytelling and sharing than slides and pictures and a lot of that type of stuff. I really like to just share story. And so I had a story that I wanted to share with y'all. And it coincides about the power of words, of place names. And so, and it's a story about me. So it's easy for me to just share it. So when I was a little girl, I grew up on a reservation in South Dakota where my father was from. It's the Yankton Sioux tribe. And they spoke Nakota, the N dialect. My mom spoke Dakota, the D dialect. And I grew up in a very much traditional home of our Dakota culture, our customs, our ceremonies. Grew up around a lot of songs, a lot of language. But one of the things that I was very much fortunate in growing up around is a lot of elders that would share stories. And one of the stories that I heard one of the elders share with me was about the Ocheti Shakoi, about the 7 council fires, and talking about creation, where we came from, Where did our people come from? And they talked about a place in Minnesota. And I was a little girl and I didn't understand the importance behind it at the time. They talked about a place that was called Coldwater Springs. And it was a place where they say that we emerged from that water. We came up from that water. And then in Dakota is Mini Osni, just cold water. And so I didn't really think about it when I was a little girl until I grew up and I was a teenager and I had transferred schools and I had moved to Minnesota and I went to a tribal school called Ichinupa Wunspe, and it was called Second Chance Learning. It was an alternative charter school. And it was all based around language and culture and lifeways. And so when I attended this school and we went on these trips, these field trips, and I remember when they took us to this particular site, Coldwater Springs. And I remember when I first got there and we walked up to the water and they told us, you know, when we first go there, you got to put some tobacco down. Anytime we go and visit really important, significant, sacred sites, we always have to bring an offering. And sometimes if you go to some of those sites around the Twin City area, or maybe you've been to some of those sites, you'll see some cloth or material hanging on a tree branch or somewhere. Those are people's offerings that they bring to those. Maybe sometimes they'll bring some food. But to us, our offerings could be tobacco wrapped in a piece of cloth and material. And so I brought it and I set it there. And immediately it was like I felt this connection, this deep connection in myself. I can't explain it. It was like I had been there before. I had known that place. And that's when it connected. The stories of those elders telling me about this place when I was a little girl. And now here I am, a teenager, remembering that and reconnecting. I felt like inside of me, I felt this deep, like, almost like if you think about, like, almost like when you put puzzle pieces together and it's just like, it just fits. And that's how I felt, like something clicked. And what it did is it reminded me where my ancestors were from, that my ancestors were here, that I come from this long history that ties me back to this location. Long before it was Coldwater Springs or Minnehaha Park or Minnesota or Twin City area, whatever, all these different ways we describe it in present day, it afforded the opportunity for me to take a step back in history. It gave me that chance to reconnect, to find that place where I felt a sense of belonging, where I felt like, yeah, this is where I belong. These are where my people were. And I felt for so long as a young Dakota, I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that going to places, and even like you hear Dakota words in these towns and all these different places, even the state, all this. I didn't feel that until I actually went to a site where I knew the story, where I knew the meaning, I knew the word for it, I knew the Dakota word. And that's when everything just clicked together and it made sense to me. It made sense to why it's important. Not only important for me, but important for future generations to come. Because I truly know, like that elder said, the land carries the history. It remembers what happened here. And the more that we bring back these Dakota place names, and the more that we recognize what these places were really called and what happened there, it helps re-educate us. It helps remind us that we're here only a minute little temporary time that we're here on Earth. But it also reminds us who was here before us. It reminds us how can we learn from that? And how does that help build us all up? And you hear a lot of things today about land acknowledgement. You know, who were the first nation or first people that lived here? Who are they? And we want to acknowledge them. We want to, you know, pay respects to those people that lived here long before we were here. But it also helps us to remember who we are, where we come from. And that's one of the other things, relatives, is I want to say is, you know, I speak on behalf of my Dakota relatives and my Dakota heritage, but I also take pride in knowing all of my different ethnicities that I represent. I'm very much a blend of all kinds of very rich people. Rich cultures, maybe not so much rich people, but rich cultures in my family and my heritage. But I know where I reside, and I reside in an area where my Dakota people were residing at one point in time in our history. They're all through this area. But I want to most importantly look at, how do I preserve that? How do I bring that back? What can I do to do that? And so my work has been around that. It's been around preservation. It's been around about revitalization in different roles and capacities. The most important one that I play in all that is just being a teacher, of just sharing what I know, what has been shared with me, what somebody felt like I needed to know at one point in time. All I do, relatives, is I bring it forward in hopes that maybe there was something that I shared, or maybe there was something that I talked about that can help you on your own journey. But also, most importantly, maybe teach you something. Maybe you want to dig a little bit deeper in understanding these things. And there's a lot of resources out there. I know that the Minnesota Historical Society has been doing a tremendous amount of trying to find more history, share more history. So they do have a website dedicated to a lot of the Dakota history. It's the U.S. Dakota War. They have a whole bunch of resources and information, even before the war, aftermath of the war. But also the Minnesota Humanities Center, they also did a lot of work around Minnesota history and understanding that. And they worked a lot on creating a mobile exhibit that's called Why Treaties Matter. And another one, of course, is our organization that I work for, Dakota Wichocha. We do have curriculum that we offer. We do trainings with teachers on the curriculum, and it's called Mnisota Makoce curriculum. And so we do anything to help bring education, to bring in understanding. And there's a lot of different places out there where you can find information now that'll help you to understand what the history is here. And I do appreciate being brought in by White Bear Lake Historical Society for sharing a little bit about Dakota place names. I didn't know exactly how I wanted to do this today. I thought about doing a language lesson with y'all and doing some fun activities and interactives, but I felt like sometimes we just need to talk, and sometimes we just need to just listen and to allow space for that. And so I know that for myself, I wholeheartedly believe in reconciliation. I do. I believe that we all need to heal together. The things that occurred here and happened here in our history, we have to find ways to help each other heal and to move forward. And that's one of the challenges at times that I had doing the work that I do in preservation and revitalization efforts is creating stronger allies. It's so important with this work that we have more folks that understand, that come from a place of empathy and understanding. And that's what I encourage y'all relatives is how can you support and how can you do that? And one of the ways is just sharing about the visibility of our Dakota place names and understanding the Dakota language and the values of the language. You know, our Dakota language embodies all of our values, our worldview, our spirituality, and the culture of our Dakota people. And these efforts about restoring the use of Dakota language all across our community. We've done road signs, we've done interpretive markers and increasing interpretive markers, not only just in Lower Sioux, our surrounding area with partnerships of the local city, local parks. The increase of language, presence of our language in landscapes also reflects the importance and deep connection that the Dakota people had to that particular area. So I know there's efforts around the metro area and different areas of increasing visibility of Dakota language. It's also important that we remember that reading Dakota, it's traditionally an oral language. We really spoke our language. So in the 1830s, when the missionaries came into our area, the missionaries developed the Dakota alphabet, the dictionary and grammar guides for purposes of translating the Bible and writings into the language, which I think about today as a language learner, a second language learner. I utilize those resources today that those missionaries, their intention of doing that was to, of course, you know, push the Christianity and beliefs, but most importantly, to me, it was an opportunity to capture, because eventually that we wouldn't have the oral language being passed down due to all the federal policies and assimilation that had happened in our history. So it's almost like this full circle, if you think of it in that sense of where things are at today and today's time. So I do want to open it up for a little bit for some Q&A. If anybody has any questions for me or anything or comments, I do appreciate that. If anyone wants to type anything like that in the chat.
I have a question to get us started while if people are thinking. How have school age kids reacted? How do they interact with the teachings, the language, and I guess are they speaking it every day? Is it just a school thing? What can you tell us about the kids?
Yes, thank you for asking that. We've had so much more of an increase in fluency with language usage, especially within the community. You can hear language being used in the homes or in the community itself, but you hear of it being used in the homes a lot because our kids that are going to the early Head Start and preschool program are bringing that language home and teaching their parents, grandparents, or other relatives because they don't know what they're saying. They're like, what are they saying? So they have to learn the language with them. So it's like our little ones are teaching the older ones how to speak and it's like reciprocal, and then they're teaching them other skills and other teachings. It's going back and forth, so that intergenerational is one of the steps that we see that is really helping to benefit the language fluency within our community.
Well, if we don't have any other questions now, of course, if you're watching this recording later, or if anyone has any questions, you're more than welcome to either reach out to the Historical Society and we can get in contact with Grace and put you together, or we can help you find and answer some of those resources that can help find that answer. But thank you, Grace, so much for your presentation. That education and that learning is so important, especially when like in White Bear Lake, we're coming from communities that may not know all of this stuff. So this is really, really good. So thank you very, very much again.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate the chance and opportunity. Thank you.